Hi, Cairo Ozga here again. Welcome back to the weekly wrap-up brought to you by Tech Law Decoded. Going back to the regular format this week, which means bringing you the latest in tech regulation developments. That includes a chaotic week for China's social media mega app TikTok, the latest on the European Commission review of Google's acquisition of Fitbit, a US DOJ close review of Intuit's planned acquisition of Credit Karma, and finally, Australia's release of a draft code of conduct regarding digital platforms and their dealings with publishers. Just a reminder, this is not legal advice, and the views expressed here are my own. Let's start with TikTok. The social media sensation has found itself in the middle of what I think can only be accurately described as an international relations shitstorm. The extremely popular app, which has 100 million users in the US and 800 million worldwide, has a highly coveted young demographic, and it was already being investigated by the US FTC regarding data protection concerns when the US administration last week threatened to ban the company outright in the US. The administration raised national security concerns about the surveillance of TikTok US-based users. But many commentators saw this action as another arena for a very volatile trade and international relations conflict between US and China. There are also some elements of digital protectionism here, which would seem to be favoring US big tech companies. Facebook, for example, has been outwardly critical of TikTok, claiming the concerns they have to do with data protection issues. But at the same time, Mr. Zuckerberg told Congress at the hearings last week that TikTok is a major competitor, and Facebook has launched a competing product called Instagram Reels. It also emerged that Microsoft is looking into buying out TikTok's China-based shareholder, ByteDance. And that would include an acquisition of TikTok's US operations and operations in some other countries. And as part of providing some reassurances to the US administration, Microsoft has already signaled that it would take steps to ensure that US user data is moved to and then exclusively kept on US servers, or at least in the control of US operations. The administration injected itself into that deal in some unconventional ways. And then yesterday, it issued an executive order that bans TikTok and another popular Chinese app, WeChat, from entering into transactions with the US. The effect of this is seen as essentially forcing a sale of TikTok's US operations. And that would be within the next 45 days, because that's when the executive order is set to go into effect. And so one has to wonder whether the ultimate buyer of TikTok, whoever that might be, ends up benefiting from some of the pressure applied to the company to sell itself in such a short period of time. Again, suggesting that some US big tech interests, indirectly or directly, have some role to play in the administration's approach with respect to the highly successful Chinese-based app. But the bottom line is that an emerging trend of digital protectionism is opening up a new chaotic arena for tech companies that are trying to build an international presence. One can add this to a growing list of legal and regulatory risks associated with dealing in cross-border data collection and data use. So moving on to deal news, the European Commission, the EU's antitrust enforcer, is reviewing Google's acquisition of wearables maker Fitbit. Google had proposed commitments to address the competitive concerns of the European Commission. Those commitments would have ensured that health data obtained through Fitbit would not be used by Google in targeting advertising. Comments were received by the Commission regarding that proposed remedy, and it appears that the Commission has found it to be inadequate to address its concerns. And therefore, the European Commission opened a full-blown Phase 2 investigation this week. The concerns raised by the competition authority are noteworthy because they address non-horizontal theories, as we would call them in antitrust. That is, concerns that really have nothing to do with direct competition between Google and Fitbit, the two merging companies. The concerns instead come in two main forms. First, a concern about vertical foreclosure of Google's competitors. Vertical foreclosure of Fitbit's competitors, resulting from degrading interoperability of the Google Android operating system with rival wearables manufacturers. And the second concern has to do with entrenching Google's dominance over the online ad space by further improving its, quote, data advantage, which would raise barriers to entry for rivals and, the theory goes, lead to higher prices and fewer choices for publishers and advertisers. It's also interesting to see ad tech services proposed as a separate potential market by the Commission, in addition to its traditional online search advertising and online display advertising markets. And ultimately, this should be an interesting case to follow. Despite seeming close to a resolution a mere few weeks ago, it now looks like the Commission is focused on a major investigation, which ultimately could set some noteworthy precedents for data-driven digital deals like it. Moving on in deal news, in the U.S., the U.S. Department of Justice is looking closely at a proposed acquisition by Intuit of Credit Karma. Intuit has a number one tax prep software tool called TurboTax. And in the meanwhile, Credit Karma entered the online tax prep market in 2017. Putting them in competition with the TurboTax product. This isn't the first time the DOJ is looking at tax prep. In 2011, the agency successfully blocked a merger of two tax prep services, H&R Block and TaxAct. And here it looks like it's issued a second request. And based on some inside scoops by ProPublica, which is a journalistic group that has extensively covered TurboTax, found that the company is considering offering a divestiture of the Credit Karma tax prep business in order to get the transaction cleared by antitrust authorities. However, it seems that there's some doubt whether the tax prep business can be spun off and survive as a standalone business because currently those tax prep services are offered for free and they're used to gather valuable user data as well as to help offer users other revenue-generating financial products. So it will be interesting to see how the DOJ navigates this sort of business model that involves cross-subsidization from free services to other revenue-generating products, which of course is a model very common in the tech space. Finally, this week, Australia released a draft code of conduct for digital platforms. This originated from a sweeping market study by the Australian Competition and Consumer Protection Agency, the ACCC, which found, among other things, that media companies were struggling due to declining advertising rates, which was in part attributed to big tech platforms' emergence in the area. The report has various recommended regulatory actions, including forcing big tech platforms to pay publishers for the content that they use in, for example, news feeds. And originally drafted as an industry code of conduct, it quickly transformed into a mandatory code of conduct as the ACCC concluded or seemed to get the impression that the industry was not acting quick enough. And so the ACCC has now released draft rules. Those draft rules will start with Google and Facebook, but the ACCC has already signaled that other digital platforms will likely follow. And the goal is to essentially partially restore the balance of power between media companies and the big tech platforms. The new rules will allow news media publishers to negotiate either together or separately with Google and Facebook to determine payments for use of their content. The payments are to be derived from the revenue that the platforms earn from selling advertising next to that content. And the mechanics of the arrangement include mediation and also binding final arbitration. The rules also include some other protections not related to just payments, such as increased transparency about the user data that platforms gather, mandatory notification to publishers of changes in a platform's algorithm that affect the referrals or rankings to the digital content that's offered by publishers, as well as in the display of that content. And finally, also some restrictions on the digital platform's ability to discriminate in their treatment of media companies that participate in this framework. Google has fought similar efforts by France and elsewhere to require such mandatory payment to publishers. And it's expected that they will do the same in Australia, although not necessarily a big market for Google in terms of revenue associated with the use of such content. It's been reported that the company is hesitant to set a precedent that might be rolled out worldwide that could ultimately hit the bottom line. So that's it for this week. For more on the latest developments in the worldwide efforts to regulate the digital revolution, check out my website at techlawdecoded.com or follow me on Twitter at Kai Rosga. So have a nice weekend and see you next time.